7:55, we have completed executive session, calling the business meeting back into order. All trustees are present. We have 6 trustees physically in the boardroom, and our board president continues to be with us remotely from Syracuse, where she's attending the New York State School Boards Association convention. So we will start with our Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll ask Mr. Barry to lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, emergency procedures. Please make note of the exit signs, and in case of an emergency, leave quickly and safely through the exit doors. This is also a smoke-free school district, no smoking anywhere on district property. Similarly, it's a bully-free and hate-free school district. We next go into communication and announcements, and I believe our superintendent will take the lead on this.
Absolutely. So, with the board's permission, I am going to go out of order. So I'll go items 2, 3, and then 1, which is the board recognition, which I'm going to say at the end of my presentation. But welcome. Let's get right to it. So one of the things I want to start talking about, I entitled this Words of Caution. This is Red Ribbon Week. For people who are not familiar with it or board members, it's basically a week that sort of focuses on awareness in terms of the use of tobacco, alcohol, illicit drugs, and violence prevention. High school students and middle school students were able to engage in an assembly program hosted by the Suffolk County Police, and there's been various events throughout our schools. I think it's just incredibly important that we all have these conversations in our homes and with our children, because obviously substance abuse and violence can become very prevalent in communities, and especially the use of drugs and not just drugs. I think that's a sort of a broad statement to make, but certainly the use of cannabis, the use of tobacco by virtue of Juuls and these new devices is becoming more and more of an issue for young people. So again, I think it's great that we host Red Ribbon Week, and credit to the school buildings who have participated, Campus Unity as well, participate in creating these programs. So another word of caution I wanted to mention is social media and cell phones. I know this goes without saying, but I really want to emphasize to parents and families to please, and the high school students may not want to hear this, but we really need to be vigilant and monitor activity and cell phone use, because we're seeing a rise, and not just here in South Country, but nationally on, we talk about social media challenges. We've all heard of the One Chip Challenge. We send the communication out to the community about that. The I Need a Tissue Challenge, where kids are ripping shirts off other kids. So all these challenges basically create unsafe situations, and a lot of them are silly, or I should say they're silly until someone's get hurt or somebody is really compromised by these challenges. Another TikTok challenge was a school threat challenge that happened a few months ago. So I just want to create an awareness that parents should really be vigilant in terms of social media use and cell phone use, because what's happening now are people, and students and adolescents and young people are just misusing cell phones. And cell phones could be an incredible device. They can cause a lot of harm when pictures are shared or derogatory information is shared. So I just want to create kind of an awareness and just emphasize that it's something that we should be mindful of. And certainly if you see something, say something. Students do cry out for help on social media. There's been in my career several students who we provided intervention for who had suicidal ideations because they posted something, and out of the good nature of their friends and peers, it was reported to the school. So again, if you see something, don't make any judgments, report it to a school official, mental health professional, someone you have a connection with, so that we can kind of mitigate the issue and move forward and help protect our students. On to more positive things. Our capital reserve vote passed, so I just wanted to thank the South Country community and of course the Board of Trustees for their support in this endeavor. We're quick to, we already started the process of getting these projects initiated. And just as a reminder, these projects include replacing the turf field at the high school, which is used for a variety of reasons, for a variety of purposes, I'm sorry. The addition and replacement of some handrails at the high school, interior doors, camera systems, and security door access. As with any technology, they have, technology doesn't have a really long lifespan. It's important that we upgrade our equipment so that we're sort of contemporary in our technology, especially when it comes to student and staff safety. But I just wanted to thank the board and our community for supporting the Capital Reserve vote. More fun truck or treat. These are pictures from Vern W. Kritz. I just want to give a big shout out to everybody involved in making these fun activities possible. That includes community members, staff, the ambulance company, the fire department, and anyone else who contributed to just create a fun time for kids. I obviously had fun. These are photos from Vern Kritz, and I also attended the trunk or treat at Frank P. Long, which was another great time, although some of the kids were very spooky. So, but it was great to see kids out and see community members interacting with staff. When we talk about a culture of care and creating an atmosphere of belonging, certainly events like this certainly feel like you belong, and everybody's invited. Kramer and Brookhaven will have their trunk or treats on Thursday. The high school is doing their trick or treat street on Friday. So if you have the opportunity to come out and support and have a good time. And I was really impressed by some of the decorations in the trunks as well. Belport High School also hosted its pep rally, which is fantastic. This is a shot of me taking a selfie with every team, from cross country to volleyball, to soccer, to football, to tennis, and cheer, of course. It's just great to celebrate all of our sports. Like music programs, I think sports and athletics create a nice niche for a lot of students and really create lifelong memories. And kids really connect when they participate in teams. So it was just great being there. High school students were fantastic. It was just a great afternoon. So I had a lot of fun. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the high school. And of course our pep rally led to homecoming, which was another fantastic event. I had the honor and privilege of speaking at the football breakfast. A couple of the trustees were there with me, Mr. Piccini, Trustee Trent, and Trustee Felice were there. It really was a nice, great family event. That's the best way I could characterize it. It's a beautiful tradition that was started by Coach Sip years ago that I'm happy that we still carry out. So it was great to be able to talk to our football players and also see all the moms and dads that participate in making this happen. They cooked the food, they arrived early. It really was a fantastic event, and some of our directors were there as well as the high school staff. That led on to our homecoming parade, which was also a lot of fun. I want to thank Mr. Briggs for constructing a wonderful float, the Clipper Pride little boat. I don't know what we can call it, but I sure had fun riding on it and certainly seeing the community out there and throwing some candies out. Homecoming, of course, is not limited to sports or our football team. I have to give a big shout out to our pep band and the music department. Pep bands are a huge part of homecoming. When you think about football games, you think about the sounds you hear. So I do want to give a shout out to our music department and the pep band, our youth sports in our community, and again, our board of trustees who were all very smiling. And I did highlight the scoreboard. It says 35-9. Not that I want to boast about that, but I will. Clipper Pride, great victory for our football team. A great day. And it's school board recognition week last week. So I'm a little late, but I did want to give an opportunity to really show my appreciation for the Board of Trustees. As a first-year superintendent, obviously I had a lot of anxiety tied to me assuming this position and nerves, and I really feel fortunate to work with such a great team. I really appreciate the different perspectives we have. I do think that we have a diverse team, and what I mean by diverse is that we all come from different experiences, different perspectives, and I really enjoy the conversations and discussions we have. And there's a lot that goes into being a trustee that's not seen by the public. Sure, all of our meetings, open meetings law, all of our business is conducted in public, but that doesn't mean that we're responding to concerns or thinking about things and really doing our best to support and advocate for our community. Here are some shots of just different events that we attended, some school visitations, presentations, and even Vice President Ann Hayes stepping outside of her comfort zone to do the Macarena on stage. So it's been an exciting year. I mean, we're only through like pretty much one quarter, but it's been fun. And you know, I know we have a lot of challenges ahead, and I like to frame it as a challenge because challenges are fun, especially when you meet them. There's no greater feeling than meeting a challenge. So I just wanted to show them our appreciation, and the Board of Trustees can look in their bags. We got you a little special gift. They've been waiting for a long time, so you can take a look. I hope you appreciate it.
Nice, look at that.
Oh, all right.
Oh, my name is on it. How do you know I like put my name on
Look
it?
at this.
There you go, Mr. Trustee Trent. So, since we're doing Spirit Fridays and a lot of spirit wear here in the district, I thought it'd be nice for us to have spirit wear.
All right. Thank you.
Nicely done, thank you.
Thank you guys. So, but thank you for what you do. It's not easy being a trustee because, you know, it's volunteer work. It commands a lot, and I really appreciate all your effort. So, thank you.
And thank you for your handwritten note, too.
Yep, each of you has a little note, so you can read it at your phone.
Very nice, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. And Cheryl, I'm sorry you're not here, but I do have yours. We'll be waiting for you.
Can't believe you didn't have it shipped up to Syracuse so she could open it.
All right, so that concludes my portion of the agenda.
Okay, so we now have trustee and advisory committee reports. Mr. Barry?
Ultimately, I think right now I don't have much to report, but I just wanted to say, certainly appreciate your appreciation of us as well as for the fellow trustees. I think we're moving in a great direction, so I'm excited for it.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Mr. Pacini?
Thank you. Well, thank you for the shirt very much, and I agree a lot of what you said. At least in homecoming, I got to be part of the breakfast and the game, and it really was a nice day. And it really was a really nice weather day. Kind of makes it. It puts a little exclamation point on it when you have that beautiful day and everybody's out and about. So it was nice. Really nice day all around. I did have a Nassau Suffolk School Board Executive Committee meeting last week, and there were a couple of things that did come out of that I did want to share. One, I shared an email with the board today, and Ms. Felice, Ms. Santana, I left a couple of hard copy books. There is a report in here from the Long Island Education Coalition that was sponsored by the Long Island Association, the Cost and Outcomes booklet. There's a lot of really good information in there for trustees about demographics and funding and schools and taxes, et cetera. So that is, the digital version is in that email. I know there's a couple, like I said, a couple of hard copies floating around, if anybody wants to look at the hard copy of it. But I didn't have a chance to really go through it yet. We thumbed through a couple of it at the meeting, and there were just a couple of pages that had some really eye-opening stats in there that I think it's important for us to know as we get into advocacy season. The other part was, and I think the flyer was in there for it, Nassau Suffolk School Board is putting together a workshop, and I don't remember the name, I'm trying to pull it, see what it is, but it is with Assemblyman Thiel from out east, who's a really great legislator. He's the only independent in New York, and he caucuses with both parties. So he's always, my years of lobbying in Albany, he was always the favorite stop, because he really is just a good guy, and he doesn't lie to you. He tells you where it's at. And he's putting on a little workshop about how to effectively advocate with state and federal representatives. And basically he'll always tell you what to do and not to do, right? Don't send letters, they go in the garbage, right? That's the first thing he always says when you go up there. Nobody reads them. Come here and do this, or whatever. So that's coming up in December. So that should be a good workshop. The other one that, and then there's the wind one, which I believe I'm going to, and I think that's the same night as the Honor Society.
November
Do we have anybody else in the district that's going? Did any of the business teachers or STEM, anybody?
I have to follow up.
Just let me know if they're going, just so I know if they're there, I can meet up with them, because it is like it's not really a formal dinner, it's really more like a cocktail hour, and there's gonna be stations, and apparently there's a lot of interest from the business community on Long Island about this, so there might be a lot of opportunities to have some meaningful conversations. In addition, there is, this was confirmed the other night, Mr. Vecchio, the executive director of Nassau Suffolk School Boards, has confirmed an event that NYSBA will hold in the spring, and Betty Rose is going to be there. so she confirmed that she's gonna come down, and it'll be a nice opportunity to hear directly, the Long Island districts, to hear directly from Ms. Rosa. So that will be in.
Ms. Rose is the Commissioner of Schools.
I'm sorry, Commissioner of Education, yes, thank you. I'm always very mistaken as the Chancellor of the Regents like she used to be. So, and that was it. The only other thing, that Assemblyman Thiel, again, this is important because we do talk about pilot payments. There is legislation that he is sponsoring to make LIPA a fully public power entity again. I think Long Island is the only area in the country that has partially private and partially public utilities in the way PSCG, and I don't know if it's LIPA, however it works. I'm not very well versed in it, but he is sponsoring a legislation to make LIPA fully public. The issue with that is some of the other power companies, there are some significant pilot payments being paid to school districts throughout Long Island, and those are in jeopardy if that happens. So that's something that bears, and I don't know if the Caithness pilot or anything comes to there, has anything to do with any of this, but something we need to pay attention to. And then the other thing we talked about, which is really not till next year, but there is a scheduling issue next year on the calendar with the way Easter and Passover fall. So when we get into the calendar, we had a long talk with that. The superintendents that were there had mentioned it being an issue that they're like a month apart now.
Oh, wow.
So that creates some issues. And that's really it. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Trent?
I have nothing to report.
Mr. Flippin? Ms. Kavanaugh?
Just one thing, last week, perhaps the week before, I had the opportunity to attend the Teaching and Learning Committee's meeting, chaired by Ms. Doyle. Thank you very much. And covered a lot of ground, discussed a lot of things, expanding some of our AP opportunities in mathematics, and also had a long and very informative discussion about the Equity and Inclusion Subcommittee and some of the great work that the administration has done with their surveys and their really admirable efforts to move South Country towards being a more inclusive district. So that's all I have.
Trustee Felice?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. As noted, I am up in Syracuse, New York, attending the New York School Board Association's annual conference. First time we're together in 3 years. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow's, I'm going to attend the pre-conference, the law conference tomorrow. And then the opening keynote speaker is going to be Marley Matlin, the Academy Award winner, who is going to be speaking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the mentors that she had during school to overcome some of her challenges throughout life. And then the session is going to close out on Saturday, late morning, with the Commissioner of Education, New York State Commissioner of Education, as spoken before. So happy to be here. Thankful to the board for approving my attendance, and was also happy to attend many of the items that the superintendent already spoke about. It was a wonderful weekend. Hats off to the Brookhaven Fire Department, who attended the Fire Safety Week at Brookhaven Elementary School. Enjoyed that performance, and actually met up with an old colleague of mine from the Sheriff Civilian Unit that we used to work together. And then finally attended a very moving ceremony for rededicating the sports complex over at the middle school after John Conquest. And just want to thank everyone involved for making that such a memorable ceremony. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, I'm not going to repeat what was said about the Teaching and Learning Committee, but I was there too, and for the first meeting of the year, I thought it went off very well, and there was a lot of excitement and a desire to keep things moving in the direction that we've seen. We've seen children feel like they belong in the school, and it's working, so I'm glad to see that keeping up. Also, the Hispanic Heritage Evening at the middle school was a complete success from anything that I saw there. The children and their families all seemed to enjoy it, as well as the administration that was there, and it was a particularly good evening. So thanks to everybody for organizing that. And I think that is it. If we have public commentary available, but no cards. So next, I think, is the, Mr. Santana, I think you have the
Correct.
data presentation?
Yeah, so at this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Beth Doyle, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, Instruction, and Accountability. She will be providing a summary of our assessment data from the prior school year. I also want to commend Ms. Doyle for all the work that goes into facilitating an instructional program, especially given the difficult times that we've all experienced during the last 3 years. I also want to commend all of our directors who are here today, and I'm going to call you out because there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that happens instructionally in school districts that people aren't that aware of. So I want to thank Jack Burke for his work in math and science and STEM initiatives. Thank both Jessica Prush and Carrie Carlson for their work with our special education department, which is a very intense sort of position to have, and their work is done to support all learners and really to try to provide that equity and success for our students. Ms. Jackie O'Hagan, who is our director, I almost said coordinator, for humanities, who led the charge with our seal of civic readiness and did a lot of great work in that regard. Fantastic stuff. And of course, Ms. Jenna Restivo, I think you're there behind Mr. Briggs, who's our Director of Guidance. And of course, we all know the important role guidance plays in schools, and not just from college applications, but just in terms of being, just at the forefront of so many things that happen that have to do with social and emotional, or social-emotional well-being of our students. So I want to thank you all for your hard work and diligence. I just felt I would be remiss if I didn't give you a shout out. So again, in many respects, what you're about to see may seem dismal, and I like being transparent. I think if you've been looking at national news reports, there's been an instructional gap that's been created on a national level. I read one report that said that students have regressed to 1990 levels of achievement. I don't know what that means as an educator. I don't know what types of assessments were around back then or how we instructed kids, so I don't know if it's an apples to oranges comparison. But I will say this, that there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And in reality, I think the board should really look at this data as a new baseline. Because even to compare it to prior years is erroneous because the last 3 years have not been typical. So from the way I'm sort of interpreting it and appreciating the data is this is our baseline, this is our starting point, and the idea is how do we grow from here. So Ms. Doe is going to talk a little bit about the data and how we plan on mitigating some of the instructional and emotional gaps that have been created by the pandemic. Ms. Doyle. Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Santana.
We got this one.
Appreciate the introduction. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, South Country community. As Mr. Santana said, I am Beth Doyle, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Accountability. So thank you for that introduction. It really does provide a nice summary of what I'll be discussing tonight. And absolutely, I was going to recognize our directors and thank you for being here tonight and for all of your support in putting together tonight's presentation and for all the work that you all do every day in our district to support our teachers and our students. So tonight, we'll be talking about our assessment data. We will be showing how we analyze the data, highlighting how we reflect on these data, and then sharing our plans to address gaps. And I will be using data and data interchangeably. I don't know why, I just do that. So I apologize in advance. And I do want to note that I won the trunk or treat at my home district for funnest trunk. So,
Oh, really?
yes, I did. Thank
We
you.
want to see photos.
You have any pictures?
I do. I'll send you some pictures. So, how are we looking at this? So, when you look at data, there's many ways to disaggregate it. and it tells our story. So that's what I will endeavor to do tonight. Our story has been impacted by the pandemic, just like schools across the nation and across the world, really, and Mr. Santana alluded to that. But these data give us good information about where we are now. It really is our baseline, as you'll see in a few minutes. And we look at where we need to grow, we make plans to address that growth, and we, of course, celebrate our successes, and to ensure that we build momentum and continuously improve. So you saw this graphic last year. This is really how I conceive of this work. The goal is the same. So I like to call our student outcomes our North Star. When we had our admin professional learning, when we unpacked our mission and vision, Amy Iolucci came up with something that I thought was genius. She said, the North Star is how we steer the clipper ship, which I thought was a really great analogy.
Trustee Hayes, write that one down.
So we look at our board priorities and strategic plan. As you see, everything overlaps here. We look at our data, so qualitative data, which is our state assessment, our survey data, observational data, and our quantitative data, which are things like our test scores and our internal assessment data. And then we develop our action plan. In our case, it's the district comprehensive improvement plan, because we are considered a target district by New York State Education Department for not meeting certain benchmarks. So we create an action plan called the DSIP, and that is really how we move forward. That's where our goals are. We regularly check in on our progress. We're honest about how we're doing, and we adjust and change course if necessary. And we feel that this is a sustainable approach because it's measured and we're really building brick by brick. So Mr. Santana just talked a little bit about this report. So the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as the Nation's Report Card, it's a congressionally mandated program. It really is considered the gold standard in testing because unlike state tests, it's standardized across the country. And it's remained consistent over time. It also doesn't hold schools accountable for results, which experts believe make it more reliable. In the spring of 2022, they sampled over 450,000 students nationally in grades 4 and 8 between January and March. So these results are alarming, as if you can see what's on the slide. Students who tested, and this is the first time they've done the test since the pandemic began, show the biggest drop in math performance in 4th and 8th grade since the testing began in 1990. It does create a sense of urgency for our students' performance. I don't know what else would, but we, a collective we across the state, have work to do. And experts know that this is a direct result of the pandemic, the remote learning and hybrid models that we had in place. So I believe our approach is deliberate, but we must understand our data at the student level to be able to support their growth. So I thought it was important to point that out because we were not immune to this and our data is very much aligned with what's happening nationally. So I'm going to start with our 3 through 8 assessment data. Our participation was low across all 3 tests. So 3 through 8 take mathematics, English language arts, and 4th and 8th grade science. Mathematically, we know that a smaller sample, there's greater variation in the data. That means a small collection of data will more likely have an extreme average, either higher or lower, but we can still glean information from this data, so I thought it was important to share. We thought it was important to share. So this is English language arts across the 6th grades, grade 3 through 8. I know it's small, but I'll just give you the headlines here. So the ELA average across the 6th grades is 26%. That means 26% of our kids are proficient in reading, which, as Mr. Santana said, it's scary. 3rd grade is faring the best, which is interesting, and they had the largest participation rate. So that box shows our participation rates. So 79% of our 3rd graders took the test, As you go up in grades, you can see the numbers decrease. I think my hypothesis is that people kind of forgot about the opt-out movement because of the pandemic, especially in the lower grades. We did have more students opt out on day 2 when they were like, oh yeah, we were not supposed to take this test. But unfortunately, their test still counts, and that's still factored into our data. So it's basically like averaging in a 0. So it's not accurate, and it begs the question, if more of our students participated, would we have seen better scores? The way to answer that is to look at our formative assessment data, which is the NWEA. It's the nationally normed test that we use in grades K through 8, which our students are participating in right now. The window closes October 28th. So more students take that test than they take the state test. So that's really a better piece of data to look at when we're looking at how to support our students. The state always looks at our subgroup data. It's part of the reason that we are a target district, because we're not making progress for certain subgroups. And as you can see here, our Hispanic students are lowest performing if you're talking about race and ethnicity. Other subgroups are language English proficient, or LEP students are also lowest performing. So this is absolutely useful information that we consider on how to move forward and support our students. In mathematics, we are performing similar to NAEP. We're doing worse in math than we are in English language arts. And this is because math builds on foundational skills year to year, and at the secondary level, course to course. So for example, if a student is missing foundational skills in algebra and geometry, they're going to struggle more in high school and in college because they don't have those foundational skills. And that's, again, what we're seeing across the nation, and we saw that last year with our NWA results as well. Participation was around 53%. For all the grades. So again, it's difficult to really use this data, but it still is a point that we consider when we're making plans.
Ms. Doyle, I have a question. What level starts proficient? Is it 3 or
3s and 4s are considered proficient.
Thank you.
So that the average there is the combined level 3, level 4.
That's a quick clarification. Just I want to emphasize a point. So like for a grade 8 example, we're saying they reach a certain proficiency, but we're basing that on only 20% of the kids.
Correct.
So,
Thank you for that clarification. It's a small amount.
But at the moment, until you get the results from the NWEA, this is what we have to work with.
Correct.
In judging. Thanks.
I mean, we do have many more internal assessments that we use. At the elementary level, we use the Fontes and Pinnell reading assessment. We have chapter tests in math. So this is not the only piece of data that we have, but this is a state assessment that we can use and have these reports available to us.
the irony is this is the data that gets like reported, and yet it's the most inaccurate data. And I'm not excusing it. There's a lot of work to be done, and we're going to be transparent about that. But again, when you're basing data on such a small percent of the children, and even when you look at the participation rates in the lower grades that are higher, a lot of those students opted out on the second day, and you still have to count their test. So in my experience, and correct me or let me know if you agree, families that opted their kids out tended to be families that had a high level of education, typically higher performing kids joined the opt-out movement. So even those numbers are kind of skewed when you're not including those students in the data.
Yeah, that tends to be the trend.
So with those points in mind, from my knowledge, what, in your opinion, is the best assessment to judge where our students are and how they're performing?
I think you have to use multiple measures,
And what would you say they are?
depending on the grade level. So I think if you're talking elementary, we use our reading assessments. In kindergarten, we now have a kindergarten screener. For reading, for math, we have chapter tests for math and focus. We have benchmark assessments at the secondary level. So there's a lot of internal formative assessments that we use ongoing. So it's not just this one snapshot at one point in time. where maybe the child didn't have a good day and they didn't test well. So it's ongoing formative assessment that really gives us the best information on how to support kids.
So do you ever like compile those assessments and then present that to the board, or would it just be kind of?
That would be a lot of data. I mean, we absolutely have those reports, you know, there's spreadsheets, but yeah, I mean, it's something that every school has.
Well, the point of those questions are, I just want to get the most accurate information.
I think NWA for K through 8 would be the most accurate.
Okay.
It's a nationally normed assessment. You're not relying on, you know, a staff member creating the assessment. I'm not saying that they don't make good assessments, but it is something that we can look at how our students are performing compared to students across the country.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So this is the subgroup data for mathematics. Again, subgroup analysis, while it provides more deep dive, it does fall short of offering actionable analysis created to help individual students. So what we believe is that differentiating instruction based on students' needs is an important way to go. I'm going to talk more about this when we talk about how we're addressing gaps. Really to focus more on core instruction in the classroom as opposed to a pull-out model, because now the majority of our students need support.
One of the things that always bothered me about this data is I feel like they're overly simplistic categorizations. So if you look at the Hispanic population, what proportion of that population fits under economically disadvantaged or not? How many of those students are students with disabilities? That's the SWB. So I think it's an overly simplified way of looking at it because people are complex to make generalizations about groups. And that's not to say we're not going to be responsive to the data, and this is what we have to work with, and we will work with it. But I just want the board to really consider that people and groups are a lot more complex than just these broad sort of labels.
Yeah, it's putting people in boxes.
Correct.
And then our 4 through 8 science tests, we had about also 50% participation rate across the 2 grades. The grade 4 science test, that was the last year that the state was administering it because we've transitioned to the new learning standards. So in June of 2024, our 5th graders will now take a science test. So there'll be no longer a 4th grade science test. And then this June is the last administration of the grade 8 science test. And then in 2024, we'll have a new grade 8 science test. So instead of 4 and 8, it'll now be 5 and 8 that take a science test. So it's really, this is, you know, to be frank, pretty useless information because it's assessing based on the old standards.
It's an assessment that's not going to exist anymore. So again, that's why, and I'll do a quick, I don't want to take your thunder away, a cautionary tale. Common Core was rolled out around 2012. I was a middle school principal at the time. And the commissioner at the time basically said he expected a proficiency rate of about 26% for New York State kids, right? Because it was a new Common Core test, never been administered before. So this is what he expected. Sure enough, the results come out and kids were in that mid-20 range in terms of proficiency, and schools were chastised for it. And, you know, to me, sometimes I wonder, and I'm not excusing data, again, to me, I want our students to perform, and I want us to feel pride when we look at results, but what does it even mean to be proficient? And that's a question like a lot of us raised, like what is the gauge, what is the measuring stick to consider a kid proficient in 3rd grade versus 4th grade versus 5th grade? And the assessments change. Anybody in education will tell you that. Year to year, the assessments change. The way kids are tested change. In math, for example, we've gone to shift to more word-heavy math problems. So if you have challenges with language, you don't even get to your math. So, and those are challenges that, you know, we have to face and meet and, you know, that we're excited about. But, you know, I like to sort of talk about those things because those are all things that to consider when you look at data.
So we'll take a look now at our secondary assessment data. So that's the Regents and advanced placement exams. The headline here is that we really can't compare it all year to year. There were many students who didn't take the exams last year, and I'll point some of those out. Some were not offered. There were no Regents in 2020. So again, we're using this as a baseline. to see where we are and how we can move forward. So this is the English Regents. So just to give you an example of what I was talking about, in 2021, only 38 kids took the test. In 2022, 333 kids took the test. So it's very difficult to make a comparison when you're talking about a disparity in those numbers. This is the Algebra 1, similar. Only 63 kids took the test in 2021, and last year 395. So I won't go into every test, but I'll just give you some highlights.
I'm gonna ask the same question Trustee Trent asked.
Yeah.
Proficiency or passing is level 3 and above for this test?
For the Regents.
For the Regents.
Yes, and what you'll notice is that some regions have 1 to 5, and some have 1 to 4, and it's the older tests that are changing that have levels 1 through 4. And I'll show you when we get to, like, geometry is 1 to 5, living environment is 1 to 4, because that test is changing. And it's now going to be called biology again.
Really?
Yes.
Excited.
So yes, so levels, it depends on what test you're talking about.
Okay.
So it's 3 and 4 or 3, 4, 5. So where am I? Living environment. So when this test changes in 2025, that will be the first administration of the biology exam. And again, this is because we've been transitioning to the new learning standards that are aligned to the next generation learning standards. That goes also for earth science, which is now going to be called earth and space science, which will be changing in 2025 as well. Chemistry, we had nobody take it last year, it wasn't offered. This year, 184 kids took the test. In 2026 is when we'll have the new administration of the chemistry and physics regions. So everything's in transition while we were in a pandemic.
The other piece, as a former high school person, last year juniors, their first Regents exam was administered last year. And in many cases, those kids never sat for a standardized test, ever, in their whole career, because of opt-out, no Regents exams for 2 years, and then all of a sudden, you have to sit for chemistry Regents that really builds on, foundational skills that are, living environment, which will be known as biology. So when you look at that 2-year gap, this slide is very telling that there's 2 years without tests, and then all of a sudden, students have to sit and take, a very high stakes test when they have no practice and really no sort of a perspective on it.
And doing labs virtually are not the same as engaging in a lab with a lab partner in person. So now, this was something to celebrate. In 2022, we had 352 students take the global history exam, 77% passing rate, so that's something to celebrate. The Regents exam in U.S. history and government was canceled last year, if you remember that. It was a new exam, and they decided not to give it last year because of the events that happened in Buffalo. There was some material that they felt was insensitive, and so they put them on hold. So that's Regents. Advanced placement, this is just an overview of the exams. So we gave out 18 different exams in 2022. 100%, that's on the next slide, but a score of 3 or better is passing. So most students that are scoring at a level 3 that are taking it. Not all of our students take AP exams, even though they may be an AP class. That is something that we're discussing internally about how we can increase participation with the exams. But that was just an overview of all the exams. Again, I'm not going to go through each one, but I will give you some highlights. So this is AP data for humanities, English Lit, and composition. So 100% equals passing. So you'll see the scale is 100%. So a score of 3 or better is passing. We believe any dip in these exams is directly related to the pandemic, but there are a few bright spots. Like English, Lit, and Composition, we had 29 students and 25 passed with a 3 or better. Seminar and research, another bright spot. As you may know about our AP capstone program, it's a diploma program based on 2-year-long AP courses, so AP seminar, AP research. Our directors of STEM and humanities have been instrumental in making this happen. We have increased enrollment in seminars, so our first year we had 70 students. In year 2, 2022, now we have 93 students enrolled. So that's really a bright spot and a testament to the teachers and to Jackie O'Hagan's work at the department. An AP seminar is not a traditional test, so it's 2 performance tasks that the students have to do. A team project, a presentation, which many of you saw at Civics Day, which was a great day. And then AP research, last year was the first year of this course. There were 43 students enrolled. And this is a bit more rigorous in that there's not teamwork. It's also a performance task, but it's very individual based, where they're basically learning how to do research and be prepared for college and preparing for research high-level course. So it's not the teamwork aspect like the seminar class has. But we had a lot of great things to celebrate in that, which I'll get into later. I love this slide. There's 100, everyone got 100%, and there were 700 kids in the class. No, really, it was just 10. It was 10 kids. But it's nice to see. Art and design is a digital portfolio online submission. It's a panel of judges that judge their work, and we had some kids with some success, so that's good to see. World history, we removed barriers to entry in 2018. And it's interesting when you look at the number of students in the classes, they've actually decreased. We removed barriers to entry, so that was something interesting to note. But here we just feel that these are typical results, again, from the pandemic. Biology and chemistry, again, impact the pandemic, labs done virtually, not offering the same experiences, although our teachers work very hard to provide a great experience for our students. There's just some gaps that, couldn't be filled virtually or remotely. In math, we're seeing something similar as, across the nation with math, referring back to NAEP and how our students are struggling. Again, we're not immune to that. Environmental science and physics. Again, this is not a lot of kids. So if you look at physics in 2022, there were 4 students and 2 passed. So that's what the 50% is. So we're not talking about a lot of students here.
And that's part of the issue when you look at averages. It doesn't really tally the actual picture.
Yeah. Because you really need to look at the actual number of exams. In world language, a bright spot is Spanish, which is nice to see. But with world language, and just like our students that are learning English, speaking is very important. And if our kids were not engaging and they haven't been engaging, the discourse is something that we've really been trying to work on, because kids are used to being behind screens and texting, and that's really inhibited their discussion, which really helps with developing a second language.
And to say credit, I do want to give a shout out to our teachers too, who play obviously probably the most important role in all this, in preparing kids and meeting challenges. But even Spanish language and culture is akin to an English AP exam. It's not, we do have a large number of Latino students who speak Spanish natively, but I just want to say it's not a proficiency test. It's the rigor is similar to that of the English language test.
So the big question, how are we addressing this? So as I said at the beginning, the DSIP, the District Improvement Plan, is our roadmap. And we had 3 goals. These goals are pretty much the same ones that we had last year with a little variation in the language. Increasing student attendance, creating a culture of care where all of our students feel a sense of belonging, and ensuring access to learning for all students through instructional best practices. And I'm just going to give you a few examples of how we're doing each of these things and how we're working towards our goals. So with attendance, we know that in order for kids to fully engage in learning, they need to be in school. And the pandemic has taught us that. So we have committees at each building level and a district-wide attendance committee where we're looking at this data regularly. Last year we updated our attendance policy to include consistent interventions and proactive strategies across the district so that our buildings are working all together. Positive behavior intervention support, for example, the Clipper Cash that's happening at Belport High School and all the other incentive programs that are going on in the other buildings contribute to a positive school culture, which is directly related to attendance. For creating a culture of care, we have our social emotional learning programs. So Second Step, Mind Up, Why Try, the restorative practices that I'm going to go into more detail later that are happening district-wide, our empathy interviews, our belonging surveys, the student voice sessions that we had where kids told us how to create a sense of belonging by adding additional questions, which we did. These are all things that we will continue to do. And then for the academic piece, it's about creating a MTSS plan, which is a multi-tiered system support. And what that means is we look at the whole picture. So we look at academics, we look at behavior, we look at school culture, and we know for academics our focus needs to be on all of our students. And I mentioned this before, that this pull-out model, it's not gonna work. We have too many kids that have large gaps, so the focus needs to be on what's happening in the classroom. Kids that get pulled out will be the kids that are showing no progress, but really our focus is on what we call Tier 1, core instruction in the classroom. And there are many initiatives that are going on in every department that I'm not gonna list here, but I'm happy to discuss with anyone in, working with Teachers College, working with our math consultants, our assessment plan changes, providing access, our new course proposals, all of these things will help support moving our district forward and supporting our students. So what are we celebrating? So there is a lot of growth that needs to be done, and we've made progress. Those two things can exist simultaneously, and we'd like to show some of the things that we're celebrating. So I touched on this, and Trustee Kavanaugh and Hayes mentioned the Equity and Education Committee. This is where the work of building a culture of care, the genesis of it, what came from, was this committee. So the great things that committee is doing is we created a board policy in 6 months, which we were very proud of. Restorative practices came out of the action plan that was created by that committee. The addition of a restorative practices facilitator, that's Kai Watkins, and the 20+ restorative practices coaches that we now have in the district, supporting community circles and restorative conversations. That's having those additional positions is really what's building the momentum with this program. And having point people in each building shows that this is a priority and this is what we believe in, and I appreciate the board's support with making that happen. The professional learning that we're doing around culture responsive sustaining framework, which is a document put out by the state that's woven into all of the professional learning that we do. Then we have the spin-off group called Equity Leaders, where that's staff members here that are put out the belonging survey to our students in grades now 4 through 12, where the students take the survey, and it's called the Psychological Sense of School Belonging. It's an 18-question survey. We do it on Google. We disaggregate that data, see which group feels the most marginalized, and then we conduct something called an empathy interview with those groups to learn about their experiences in school and times when they felt like they did belong, and then we work to replicate those experiences so they have more experiences where they feel like they belong, and then we do the cycle twice a year, and we just keep doing it until all of our kids feel like they belong and all of our staff feel like they belong. So just some great work from that committee, and I'm glad that we're continuing. Here are some examples of restorative conversations. So that's Kai Watkins and a student having a conversation. That's a community circle from Frank P. Long. We had a great event at Kramer Street where our second step, our SEL program, we had students, the athletes go to Kramer and push in and work with students on second step. We called it Restorative Athletes, and it's something that we're gonna do in the other buildings as well. It was a big hit, lots of great feedback. This is really something that we're very excited about, that 95% of our graduates earn the Seal of Civic Readiness. The seal is a designation that students get on their diploma. It's a formal recognition that they attained a high level of proficiency in terms of civic knowledge, civic skills, civic mindset, civic experiences. And this was our first student who graduated with the seal. His name is Jesus. I'm gonna tell a funny story. I hope Andrew Budgers doesn't get mad. But when Jesus graduated, he left because he went to the military. And Andrew Budgers, who's in the picture there, was in the copy room at the high school, and he found all these letters to Jesus. And he was like, what is going on? Why are people writing letters to Jesus? What's happening in the English department? But it was really letters to Jesus to say goodbye to him and congratulate him on his achievement. So we thought that was very funny. So Andrew, Jackie O'Hagan, Jenna Restivo, and myself presented at the Long Island ASCD conference on the seal. It was an honor to present there, and we got some great feedback, and the district has actually reached out to see if they can come visit, to check out what we're doing. So we're excited about that. Civics Day, again, was a great event, that many of you were there. These are some of the projects that the kids created. And here's some pictures from Civics Day. It was just a great day for students to showcase their talents, their research, their advocacy efforts, and really showing how we're building civic-minded citizens. This was from the Long Island Media Group. 9 Belport High School seniors earned the AP capstone designation on their diplomas. They participated in AP capstone and earned a score of 3 or higher in seminar and research. So we're very proud of that. Also, we had 25 students earn the AP Seminar and Research Certificate. They were required to earn scores of 3 or higher in both AP Seminar and AP Research. This is a picture from the Frank P. Long Library. Ms. Kulik, the first picture has students from Ms. Already Dodge's class building Kiva planks to race hex bugs. I didn't know what either one of those things were until she described it to me. The other is a blue Lego tree. So a student combined 2 task cards and created his own blue tree. So this is maker spaces. It basically encourages students' creativity and provides an outlet for them to be imaginative, creative, innovative. So they basically just get tools and they use their imagination to create things.
So in what setting does this happen? Is
The
that,
library.
but is it class? Is there some,
Yeah,
what class is it?
so it's library. So students, like for example, if we're in crits, the last 10 minutes of library class, the kids will have time to use makerspace materials and they love it. It's a lot of fun, there's great energy, it's a really great activity. And the things that they come up with are pretty amazing.
No, it's been amazing, and I know Trustee Trent was upset I didn't invite him to the Lego Challenge. Frank came along. But yeah, it's amazing, they really get into it, and it's fantastic to see.
And that's just another example also from Frank P. Long, some cool stuff the kids are making. Another highlight is our graduation rate. I will caution you that there were many students that graduated based on some special appeals that the state had in place. So while we celebrate that, this may not be the case because those special appeals go away after August of 2023. So we may see a drop after that. We're hoping that, given this nation at risk report, there are some accommodations that are made based on this.
So I just have a quick question. So how do you calculate the graduation rate at the end of the year? Is it with the cohort or is it just with the total 12th grade body?
gonna pass that to Jenna.
It's just the cohort, so those numbers are only those students that entered high school 4 years before that. So if we have a student who might have stayed extra time, they don't count in those graduation numbers.
Okay, so what would you call that number when you have just the whole body in total?
So the state calculates graduation rates after year 4, 5, and 6. So there are graduation rates that we can look at on the state report card. When we're looking at these numbers, it's just the 4-year cohort.
One of the things, because, you know, my former life as a high school principal, obviously graduation rate was on, you know, my consciousness. The issue with cohort is basically anybody who enrolls in your school, even if they stay for a day, are included in that cohort. So my first year working in my former district, that will remain unnamed, my starting graduation rate, this is at the beginning of the year, was 88%. Because we had a big transient population of kids that would come for a little while and they'll leave and they'll move. And if we couldn't verify that they enrolled in another school, they were considered dropouts. So a lot of these, you know, when 25% of our students in that district were undocumented students who worked. And they had family obligations. So, you know, I couldn't judge these kids or force them to stay in school when they had to take care of their families. Yet schools get hit with these numbers, which is unfortunate. So it's the cohort numbers, as Mr. Stiegel said, anyone who's registered in that year. So for 2023, that would be, 2019 would be the year they registered, are counted in your graduation rate. Even if they just stepped in your school for one day. And I use that example because I had that happen multiple times. When you kids would register in our school and immediately decide school wasn't for them, they'd never come back.
So our graduation rate in theory could be higher than this?
In theory, it could be higher. It's not going to be lower if you count like the current seniors. Typically, my graduation rate was always higher if I just counted the kids who were in the senior year at the start of the year. How many of those kids I was able to get out of high school? And the other shame of it, and Ms. Doyle alluded to it, is Regents exemptions increased graduation rates across the board, which begs the question, do we really need Regents exams to say a kid is, you know, eligible for graduation? And I don't think society is any worse off because for 2 years, we waived that requirement. And I think it hurts certain kids, certain populations when you have a strict Regents requirement. And that's not to say exams don't have their place in our society. For you to be a physician or an attorney, you're gonna have to take a lot of tests. So it's good that you get that practice. So I'm not trying to say that I'm against standardized tests. I never liked taking them as a kid. I never liked administering them as an educator. But certainly it begs the question, which we sort of proposed to Commissioner Rosa when we met with her, at what point does the state say, earning your credits is enough to graduate? When I was in high school, the Regents diploma was the advanced diploma. So if you had Regents, yeah, it was an accolade you got for having a Regents diploma. But I'm hoping the state really starts considering whether or not Regents exams are going to be a graduation requirement.
And I believe that they will, in all of my meetings with curriculum council across Eastern Suffolk BOCES, they talked, the sentiment was to not include the Regents exam in your final average, and which we changed last year. Because we're penalizing kids for a test that was weighted heavily in many cases. You know, sometimes it could be 40% of the kid's final average. So I feel like that is the way that the state is moving. Another highlight is our 4-year college rate. So in 2020, our 4-year college rate was 30%. In 2021, it was 41, and now we're up to 42.3. So more of our kids are attending 4-year colleges than 2-year colleges and other post-secondary employment and military. Another great highlight is Belport High School's testing day. This happened just on October 12th. What you're seeing there is a quick comparison from the number of students that participated from 2021 to 2022. So in October 2021, only 205 kids engaged, and because we provided access for all students, we had 754 kids participate, and you can see the breakdown by grade. So just a shout out to Jana and her team. April Orenstein was instrumental, Erica Del Rosa and her team, Amy, Dan, and Heather for making this happen, and the directors for their support. This idea came out of this work of MTSS, which is multi-tiered system of support. And the number one thing that you need is to have a universal screener for all of your students. And we had that in K through 8, and that's our NWA, but we didn't have an academic screener at the 9 through 12 level. So that's really where this idea started, and Jenna and I were talking, and we appreciate the board's support because we paid for all of the kids to take the test. So that was providing access for all, and it also is giving us a universal screener. We'll have this data in December to see how we can support our kids. Something we never talk about, I looked back at old presentations, and I think it's really important that we note the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement, also known as the NICES LAT, and the work that goes on for our E&L department. So this measures English language proficiency in 4 modalities: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And I show you is to just see the sheer number of tests that we administer for the number of students. And this shows our data from last year. And I want to point out that same doesn't mean no progress, that they may have moved within these levels because there's different levels, entering, emerging, transitioning, expanding, commanding. So you can move within levels, but remain the same. So I just thought that was important to note because we have so many kids that take that test. This happened today, and I apologize if you didn't see this in advance, but Brookhaven Elementary was offered a grant because they are a comprehensive school in need of improvement last year. It's called the Coaching for Excellence Grant, and what it did is it gave us $100,000 to cover a staff member's salary, so then that person can be repurposed as a full-time instructional coach. So we had our visit from the state today at Brookhaven. This is a picture from Miss Weinberg, who is the instructional coach, and Miss Council, who's co-teaching with her, and some of our kindergarten friends at Brookhaven. And there were about 6 adults watching them while they were teaching. And the idea is to just improve instructional practices, and they have reflection time and debriefing, and it's just a really great way for us to improve what we do. So just a shout out to them for their great work. And those are our highlights. So just to bring you back to our story. So where do we need to grow? Obviously, reading and math core instruction. How are we addressing our growth through our commitments and our improvement plan? And what are we celebrating? All the great work that we've done to date. So thank you, and I will take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Thank you. Any questions?
Ms. Doyle,
I
I'm
have
sorry.
one. When I did go to the New York State School Boards Association meeting a couple months ago, and there were speakers from New York State Commissioner of Ed's office, and there was some talk about how they're thinking about reevaluating what it means to be a high school graduate and what skills are needed as our students go off into the adult world. And they made comments about how our education model had been built around a factory-based economic environment,
Correct.
and that's no longer the case.
Yes.
So, do you know anything about how they're reimagining or bringing us up into the 21st century so that this data that is so hard to digest, partly because it's so minimal and doesn't account for all of our students,
Yeah.
and it may not even be relevant to what they're going to need to be prepared for when they leave us.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments you could share with us about what we can expect in the future?
Yeah, so I know that they put out a request for anyone that would be interested in being part of this work to, across the state. And they have a website, they have a page on the state website, so I've reviewed that. It seems like they're moving to more of a portfolio-based type of approach, more around like this project-based learning, which we're doing with the capstone program. moving more away from like the regents as the be-all, end-all. But it really requires a rethinking of education in a big way. Because that's really revamping, like, even how we schedule in schools, right? So a lot of this work takes more than 40 minutes, and which is what our periods are in the high school. So I feel like they're looking at this portfolio approach, but then, you know, at the granular level, but also looking at like the structure of schools and how that needs to change to be able to support that. That's just my understanding. I haven't been part of any of the meetings. That seems to be the conversation that's being
And one
had.
thing I can offer along those lines, haven't been, and I think it's called like the Blue Ribbon Commission.
Is it Blue Ribbon?
Yeah, I believe that's what they call it, what they're working on to reimagine education. But again, to your point, yeah, public schools were designed to create compliant workers and assembly line workers. So a lot of the rules, the way kids used to sit in rows and basically be told not to speak in class and just listen, and it was all teacher driven, was based on, again, a factory model when, you know, our economy was based on manufacturing. So that's shifted. And I read, and don't quote me on the statistic, but something around like 30% of jobs that our elementary school kids will have in the future don't exist. So how do you prepare people for those jobs? So that's where they're talking about skills, the ability to collaborate, the ability to think critically, communicate. That's why there's really a big push for diversity and inclusivity, because, you know, when you look at the way the world looks, we're gonna have to learn how to work with each other, and we're kind of creating a global economy. So, and it's tough work, because how do you best prepare kids for a world that does not exist? And that's why they're going to like skills. They used to call them soft skills, but now they're shifting because those skills aren't soft. You know, it's skills you need to sort of to thrive and succeed. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and I will say this, you know, I feel like South Country is ahead of the curve in so many respects. And I can say that because I've been in multiple districts, and yeah, even when I did my research in terms of some of the programs going on here, I was very delighted to see them, and I want to continue that work. But yeah, we're kind of preparing students for unknown future.
One comment, there's a member of the Nassau Suffolk School Board and also Eastern Suffolk Posties who's on that Blue Ribbon Commission. But there was some discussion at the last meeting too. The concern was relayed to her, because she's on the commission, about how the standards seem to have, what's the word I'm looking for, diminished to some extent. For various reasons, whether it's the
Learning
pandemic. Yeah, that seems to be a general consensus. One of the members of the executive board is a professor at Nassau Community College, and he talked a lot about it, especially in the last couple of years, about how kids are entering even his courses just ill prepared. Whether it's the pandemic, there were some comments, are the efforts in equity in education bringing down standards. I mean, I don't know those answers, but those are some of the conversations that are being had. So. And it was interesting to hear you talk about reimagining education, like, we just kind of did that. And it looks like we're talking about doing it again, so, and I know the reform agenda, as much as it was very controversial, was all about increased standards. So I'm curious to know, do we feel, as educators, do you feel like standards are, you know, is rigor going away to some extent? And, you know,
I'm sorry, but I'm gonna say it's the opposite.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah,
idea
okay.
is to really have high standards and to like close those achievement gaps. It's not to like lower standards.
And that's what we teach to, you know, without
Yeah.
standards, then it's a free-for-all. And we're back to where we were, where everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. So I think it's important to have a benchmark and something to reach towards. I think what they're looking at is more about this performance-based learning and assessments being revamped, less about the standards.
one of the comments that was made, the director shares a lot of information on social media, and one of the and I can't really quantify it exactly, but of all the, and he takes a lot of his articles that he shares with us through the e-clips that we all get through NISBA, and he had a comment, as Ray, because you listen, at the last 8 articles you shared, 7 of them were about lowering standards. So that's why there seemed to be some concern that Albany's looking to lower standards.
I don't know what that exactly means, lower standards.
I'm not sure either, that's why I'm asking. That just seemed to be the sentiment, that
Yeah.
kids aren't being asked to do as much as maybe they were a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic.
I mean, I think that we're now, because of these huge gaps, we have, like, I think about math, we have these transition guides where you have to look back, if you have a third grade class, you have to look at what they were supposed to learn in second grade and then teach that before you can get on to the new material. So maybe that's what they're talking about, lowering standards. It's like looking at what skills where they have those gaps.
So I guess to your point, right, if you have to look back to reteach standards from a previous year,
Yep.
the kids who aren't falling behind are gonna be uninspired, right? I think
Right.
that's kind of where that lower standards conversation is probably coming from.
So that's where the differentiation piece comes in, and it's not easy by any means, I'm not saying that's easy to do. And then when I talk about core instruction, that's what I mean, like, we have to look at all of our kids and see where they are. And then we have a big focus this year on small group instruction, so grouping kids based on where they are, and then meeting them and supporting them in that way.
But to that point, one of the things that the pandemic really exasperated is the economic gap. So if you're a family, and I witnessed this when I maneuvered the pandemic, some of my students literally created study areas where friends would come over, they had multiple computers, they would log on to the classrooms together and had all these resources. Some of my other students lived in apartments with multiple families and were literally limited to an easy chair, and that was their whole living space. I've done home visits. So imagine the gap that creates when you're a teenage student who's living in an apartment with 4 other families, and you're restricted to an easy chair, and I'm not exaggerating, where you have to sit with a Chromebook on your lap, and that's how you're doing your work while you're taking care of siblings and stuff. So those 2 years really started creating this gap where, to your point, yeah, some kids, my kids, I don't think were really hurt by the pandemic. I think academically, I didn't see any loss, but they had resources. They had me, they had stuff at home, computers. But
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi.
That's a big one.
So I don't think it's necessarily about lowering standards. And I think one of the things of the project-based learning is that when you have one standardized test, you're measuring people by one measuring stick. A way to differentiate, and I saw a great example when I did a program where in India, this company decided to do a lesson on GPS and how GPS works, but not technology-wise, like literally explaining the science behind GPS and coordinates. And so they did an experiment. They made the lesson open to everyone who wanted to participate. And this was like complex stuff. So sure enough, a lot of people came. Older people, younger people, kids, people of varying educational sort of backgrounds. And the point of the story was everybody was able to walk away with an understanding of how GPS works. From the youngest kid to the most brightest individual. And obviously the brightest and most educated individual went a lot deeper into it and was able to appreciate some of the nuances perhaps the other, but everybody learned GPS. And that's kind of like a model when you look at differentiation in education, because we're dealing with people who have different types of strengths and intelligences. And so do we really measure somebody's proficiency in a topic with a standardized test, or their ability to communicate their knowledge of that topic? Because you'll find that if you give students a chance to use different modalities to express their knowledge, they could do a great presentation, an oral presentation about the American Revolution. You sit them down for a standardized test with multiple choice questions, and they choke. And so I think that's kind of the reimagining. When you do project-based or portfolio-based assessments, it speaks to everyone. And what are really the skills you need to graduate high school? What makes you employable? What makes you someone who's going to contribute to society? And of course, if you're going down the route where you want to be an attorney or a medical professional, an engineer, that's an entirely different conversation. And those kids will be tested and those types of things. But right now, I think the mistake was, with No Child Left Behind years ago, was everybody in New York State's going to take a Regents. Because we're going to increase the standards, and every kid in New York State's going to be able to pass 5 Regents exams, which I think was artificial. Because there are some kids who are extremely intelligent, maybe not in standardized tests, but can pursue a trade, creative. How do we sort of foster or support artists and musicians? We don't. I mean, we have great programs for them, but I think that's kind of the reimagining and the way the state's looking at it. How do we create a system that really educates kids and prepares them to just be, college and career ready? So I was pontificating a little bit.
I have a question. Mr. O, back to the to the presentation, the slide, the page where you show the graduation rate, it looks like the lowest percentage is the English language learners. What is your definition, or what definition does the school use to identify a student that is an English language learner?
That NICESLAT exam that I talked about, that's.
The what exam?
I'll go back. The one with the pie charts,
The nicest lot.
NICESLAT.
Nice. New York State, English Language Arts.
Oh wait, it was this way. So when you enter our district, you have to take a test called NICETEL, and please don't ask me what it stands for. But it's the English proficiency test when you first enter our district, so kindergartners, first graders take it. Then each year, and you're identified based on the score on that test, it's a state test.
So this is only given to students that come into the district?
The NICETEL. And then the NICESLAT is given every year. Once you're identified as an L, English language learner, you're required to take this assessment.
Okay. So you come into the district, you take the NICETEL,
Mhm.
and then that determines if you are or you
If you're a
aren't.
kindergartner. If you've been in another district, hopefully you've already been identified and you've taken the NICESLAT, and then we just continue with you taking that
Mhm.
test. And it measures English language proficiency.
Okay.
To give you a case in point, typically kids who are identified as Ls in secondary schools have a really difficult time graduating in 4 years.
Yeah.
So New York State will tell you, yeah, it's not that unusual for a kid to take 5, maybe even 6 years to graduate if they're an L. But then again, when you look at data, we get chastised for it. And Commissioner Rosa did say that the state's approach of shaming schools because of data is the wrong approach. Because you have to look at your demographics, the different variables that affect school districts. Because in my experience as a high school person, I had kids registering for the first time ever in their life in school at 16. So imagine this, you come in as a freshman at 16 years old, and by the time you hit 21, you have to not only master English, but pass an English Regents exam. That's not a proficiency test. We all know the English ELA exam is not a proficiency test. You have to have point of reference, you have to have like cultural knowledge with text. But these kids are expected to pass 5 Regents exams and get 22 credits. When a lot of them, and I don't like to generalize, but a good proportion of them had interrupted education or are starting school for the very first time in their lives in their teens. So at the state level, I know the graduation rate hovers about 25% for
Just to add-
that population.
Sorry, to add to your question about English language learners, Mr. Trent. So after they take this test, depending on their score, that determines what their proficiency level is. So I mentioned it before, it's either entering, emerging, transition, expanding, commanding. And then they take this test each year, and then the hope is that they exit out. But depending on their proficiency level, that dictates how much support they need from an ENL teacher. So you often see that we're always hiring ENL teachers. It's because we have mandates from the state to provide a certain amount of hours depending on their proficiency level.
Now, from what I understand, we don't mandate ENL teachers to speak that language, is that correct?
You don't have to speak the language to be an ENL teacher.
Now, is that effective, having an ENL teacher that doesn't speak the language, teaching
Yeah,
us?
because you're teaching them English, right? I mean, of course, it's helpful if you have some knowledge of their home language. For example, today, the class that I was in Brookhaven, Ms. Council, I don't know if she's fluent in Spanish, but she used Spanish. So it's definitely helpful to have, I think they call it translanguaging, to be able to support students in their native language. But it's not required because you're really teaching them to be English proficient.
And it's a slippery slope because I used to fall into the trap of speaking Spanish to my ENL kids in my high school, losing sight of the fact that I want them to be proficient in English because I had that comfort level. So in order for you to be like ENL certified, you do not have to speak 2 languages. But, and again, it's like, it's a lot easier if you can kind of translate things, but sometimes teachers fall into that trap and all of a sudden the instruction's all in Spanish. And that's our predominant language here on Long Island. Because our L's, in my former school I had L's who were Italian, I had a kid from Africa, and I had a kid who was Ukrainian who didn't speak English. All mixed in the class.
Yeah, so there's no way that you'd be able to find teachers that speak all of
And
those
like in,
languages.
and like in, I think it's, is it Minnesota, they have a huge Somali population. So their ELL kids speak, I don't know what they speak in Somali, it's not ignorant, but Somalian or Somali.
So, according to the graduation rate, there were 31 12th graders that were not proficient in the NYSE SLAT test.
Nice.
Nicest lab. Is that?
I'm sorry, can you ask your question again? 31.
31 students that were not
Enrolled,
proficient in that test that you,
Are you looking at the pie chart or?
I think
no, because
he's
you,
looking at graduation rate.
the graduation rate. So I want to get an understanding of how many English language learners we had in 12th grade. And to be an English language learner, you need to not be proficient on that test.
No, there's different levels of proficiency.
Okay.
So there's those 5 levels of proficiency. So the hope is that you're moving through those levels the longer that you're here.
Okay. So is there a situation where they just perform like a 5 or that highest level and are not an English language learner?
You can test out, absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
Young kids test out quickly.
Yeah.
Because, you learn language, you're wired to learn language like when you're like preschool.
Yeah, it's much harder when you come here when you're
an
14.
adult.
I just thought that I was under the impression that we had more students that were under that designation in 12th grade.
So English language learner doesn't necessarily mean Hispanic. So some
Yeah.
people conflate, you can be Hispanic and not be an English language learner, so maybe that's where the confusion
And by
is.
senior year, the hope is they test out.
Exactly, so
Because
if
again,
they've
it's
been
the
here with
5
us
levels.
since kindergarten, you're hoping by,
You
by
shouldn't
the
be,
time they get to high school, they're not an English language learner anymore.
but as it stands right now, and again, I may not be precise, I think we're something like 15 or 16% of our population are English language learners as a whole.
They speak Somali or Arabic in Somalia.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Somali.
Google. Thank the Google box.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Doyle.
you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think we have only one business item that you
Correct.
wanted to bring to us.
Yes, so.
F1.
Thank you. The administration recommends approval of business items reflected in schedules F1.
Is there a motion to approve business item F1? Ms. Kavanaugh, second by Mr. Barry. Questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Okay, it's unanimously approved. And now, we have no public commentary still, and any closing remarks? Seeing none, I think we need a motion to adjourn. Mr. Trent, second by Mr. Flippin. All in favor? And that one's unanimous as well. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Vice President Hayes, thank you, President Felice, for doing your due diligence and participating